Hey everybody, I'm Eric Gerlach. Hope you guys are having a good time, day or night. And this is a talk on Daoism, following the previous talk. More about early Daoism, the Tao Te Ching, and specifically about Daoism and the mother of all, and the feminine in Daoism. Because one striking thing about Daoism compared to the world's philosophies and religions is that there is an emphasis on taking the female perspective and comparing the cosmos to a mother, which shares and includes the perspectives of all things. The last talk was on the basics of the Taoists and the Tao Te Ching. This will be on, those are patriarchs and the major stories of the patriarchs. And now we're going to have the female and the mother of all, and we'll talk a bit about that historically here, and talk a bit more about the Tao and the Tao Te Ching and how that is the perspective of all perspectives, and the female. Going to do this talk, and then that will lead into more about my favorite Chinese philosopher, Zhuangzi, a dude, Master Zhuang, a male patriarch, who is very into the perspective of perspectives and has lots of metaphors that are incredible at teaching us perspective and wisdom in Taoism, my favorite of the Chinese philosophers. We'll talk about how that's male patriarchs taking over possibly a female tradition here, and talk about how Taoism uses the metaphor of the mother not only for being itself, but of perspectives, and thus wisdom, breadth of perspective. As Bodhidharma, who supposedly brought Chan Zen Buddhism from India to China, the tallest thing on earth is the self, but the widest thing, the greatest thing, is the mind, as tall as the self, but far wider than the narrowness and height of the self. So if we compare early and late versions of the Tao Te Ching, some scholars say that there is a playful trickster female valley water spirit, take that for what you will, this video's for children, which takes perspectives however she likes, and that was increasingly blended and balanced with a stabilizing heavenly bright force which takes all perspectives like a monistic god, which is not named as male nor emperor, but which is quite evident in the final 15 verses of Wang Bi's canonized final version of the Tao Te Ching. Please watch the previous talks on the Tao. None of which are in the earliest of the Bamboo Lao Tzu, and you can listen to my recitation of that. So it does seem that there was possibly a female-centered, possibly female-originating philosophy and poetry, possibly captured in the Bamboo Lao Tzu, already read, and then this was increasingly balanced as male-female, and already was speaking as male-female as balance of forces and perspectives, and that this becomes a more empire-building, more patriarchal, one could say, officially, in fact, because it was put under patriarchs, not just that this is a judgment, say, of how patriarchal this is, but specifically the tradition was wedded to patriarchs, and that it becomes more of a stabilizing force. As mentioned, we find in the earliest versions of the text, fight less. Then in the final version of the text, it's don't fight at all, very much, the empire is somewhat settled, now we have more peace. Of course, don't fight at all seems more or less male, what have you, but we have, the text becomes more patriarchal and also less into fight less and more into fight not at all. We have the empire. So this does seem that this has grown in interesting different ways, together with Taoism becoming popular before, during, and then after the Han, with Wang Bi canonizing his final version of the Tao Te Ching during the end of the Han, or just after, I believe. These two together, the early trickster female increasingly associated with the mental order and male, gives us the final effect of an all-knowing yet tricky cosmos, which is quite female and motherly, but which takes and uses the female and male, the non-being and being, the manifest and hidden, the emotional and rational, say, which is very verbal and I would say very much feelings and words, and associating those, engendering those, and expectations about that. The incomprehensible and the conceptual, and think about how the female is the hidden and the secretly, not overtly conceptual and or content, together to do everything. If we say that looking at things from the perspective of being and male is one-sided, such that what is and what isn't, what some call the principle of non-contradiction, what is often associated with Aristotelianism, although it does actually get more complicated than that, and I have videos about logic and will be making more through this and next semester. If we then, complementary-wise, say that looking at things from the perspective of non-being and female is two-sided, such that what is also isn't, and what isn't also is, as like the yin-yang, which the Taoists incorporate from the yin-yang school of the Warring States period, the famous image of opposition, so then the female perspective takes both the female and male perspectives, rather than just the female perspective. Taking the contradictory and non-contradictory together is sort of women, if you would like, socially figuring everybody out. As I like to joke, the women in my family not being rational was never the problem my family has. They're always figuring out what you're up to, dang it. So as far as I do not want to say in the slightest women are irrational, here this could be read in, as we're already doing, say gendered and or sexist ways or not. This is that the female is either the superior and or the equal, and that is blended together in ways such that you do have here something like the dogmatism versus skepticism, something like absolute versus relative, something like objective versus subjective. And here the subjective is the objective and the subjective in a sense. The relative is the absolute and the relative. Together in a way, the absolute or the masculine or the male is one-sided and not seeing both sides. In a sense, and I am male myself, have been a couple weeks now, is that as far as being a progressive dude, I try to abide. It does seem that the testosterone in the male seems a little bit one-sided and myopic on something, and women are sometimes taking multiple perspectives and playing the more social game, although I do not want to sound that I am gendering that or categorizing that. But people in ancient China, men and women possibly first and foremost here, were observing how men and women behave and understanding truth and meaning in these terms. We now again understand truth and meaning in terms of text and numbers, but people would have understood it in terms of gender and sexuality a lot more in the ancient times when people had fewer numbers and words in their lives and were trying to feed and house each other poorly, unlike ourselves, because we're worse than that in ways. But perhaps not. Two sides, one-sided, all of that back and forth. So we have here that you find this similarly fits in the last video, the play non-being is the superior as being non-being, but it also is that being and non-being are complementary, which is what, say, relative non-being, all this and this not, would understand more. It's quite remarkable. It is not necessarily feminist egalitarianism. Women and men lived in rather patriarchal structures in ancient China. There is evidence, and this is debatable, but I do find it agreeable, as many anthropologists have said. Not only do you find things being more authoritarian and egalitarian back and forth in different generations in African villages and in the Amazon, where people are not so simply authoritarian versus egalitarian. They're more loose about it, and it can change around with fewer texts and set traditions and buildings and institutions and specialization of practices, which is something we do find goes along with more civilization, text, math. With less specialization and fewer jobs and fewer texts, which does not mean less of a brain or less rational, it does seem like people were not only authoritarian, egalitarian, but somewhat matriarchal, patriarchal, and then as things get written down and kept together, and people stack more and more stuff, as Amazonians sometimes lash to the sides of their huts, plastic stuff they can acquire, some, not all, Amazonians, hashtag, is that we find that in the Vikings and in China, it is possible that more so egalitarian and or matriarchal culture, somewhat, this was not a blessing or a happy time necessarily in the slightest, and we shouldn't idealize or demonize any sort of time necessarily, and be careful about doing that, because people are people and treat people like people, is that it may be that in parts of China that are more matriarchal of older times, we find evidence that China was somewhat more, I won't say egalitarian, because I wouldn't say that of any sort of people, and it's not about, being American, it is not about China at all. It is about that things became more patriarchal as there were more and more warlords and more men trying to hand power down to their sons. And that this does seem a thing. I will say, certainly men, as people get more and more stuff, and as communities get larger and larger, I definitely support theories that say that women are increasingly, as the community gets larger and larger, you have city-states, increasingly women are kept in the home, and that's men and women keeping women in the home, and increasingly men are the ones who go out into the public sphere, into danger in the city even, which is very much living not in a village but in a city, which I love living in the city, and I love multiculturalism, so I'm in it to win it here. But that you definitely see things turning more patriarchal, and then you find men handing down power, trying to their sons specifically, or their strongest dude. That is something, a pattern I do believe you see in the world. You do see somewhat matriarchal, patriarchal turn more patriarchal. And you can believe whatever you like about that. Some people, of course, right-wing will think that that's good. Some people, left-wing, will think that's bad plenty. I am more Berkelian, but it is what it seems. It is not feminist egalitarianism to say, oh, look at the female. There is a lot here where maybe this is a female philosophy. Maybe this is a male philosophy saying, hey, appreciate the female. We find male Taoists saying you really, if speaking as men to men, much like Plato's dialogues and Socrates, you should really learn to think more like women if you're a male and you want to be brilliant. That's actually very Edgar Allan Poe says, be both a poet and a mathematician. Very much like these two sides. Be smarter with the social and the emotional guys, and you will be more brilliant. Like Poe, Carroll, lots of other thinkers I admire, growing the hair out a little, is that feminist egalitarianism? No, because telling men, hey, think more like the women does not mean raise the sisters up and let's all vote or let's all do anything. So this could be feminism. This could also be men appreciating women and keeping women in their place, which is very much Plato's Republic and others things, debatably. There's an old joke in, it's not so old. It's, if you have seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the crazy aunt, who is an awesome character, says the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And the neck can turn the head any way it wants the head to look. Which, of course, this is women joking around in traditional culture. No, we really have the power. And I have had good conversations with friends, family, etc., colleagues, about whether or not this is empowering to women or not, and those are interesting, wonderful things to say, and I am not making a position about that right here, of course. Those are wonderful issues, and we're going to stick to Taoism and Taoist teachings, of course. But these are all interesting things to debate. Of course, I am someone who would more Foucault-like say women have had power plenty the whole time, and this shows us this. But also at the same time, of course, I think it is proper to say that that does not mean that women have had equal power the whole time, and that that's all been roses and or orchids, So thus we have the situation very much as I'd like to lay it out here. And the woman is the neck, in a lot of China. So you have men telling other men to be brilliant by also thinking like women and using their emotions to think and using perspective and wisdom. So if you have men, Socrates was taught wisdom by two women, Diotima and Aspasia, the priestess, shaman, Diotima, and Aspasia, the mistress of Pericles. And he was taught, he says those are his two big inspirations. So you find oddly in very patriarchal Greek, Plato's dialogues, women have no speaking parts, and yet in the Apology, Socrates tells people, yeah, it was two women who taught me what I know. Possibly to take a more comedic, humble position, as he does with a lot of stuff. So again, that's not necessarily feminism. It could be co-opting the powers and abilities of women. So think about it's probably all of these things in all different directions, isn't it? It suggests men and women who both men and women who pay attention can see that women and men actually run the show together, and women actually understand this in patriarchal cultures where men are given authority over women. That does seem reasonable to say, having interacted with hopefully enough women in my life, would like to interact with more. And yes, that said, that essentially I continue to have conversations with people and hope I'm not speaking foolishly entirely with many controversial things. As usual, we talk about everything you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table, Thanksgiving if you're American or otherwise for you. And yes, as usual, I try to lay out the human culture, make it all very human, and that's what it is. So the Bamboo Lao Tzu and Great One both refer to the Way and One as a mother. which would mean in both parts of the earliest parts of the text, there is in both. In the simpler, fewer verses, there is the All Mom, which I don't know if that's a band name yet. The mother, DJ All Mom. I once tried to find, there was a reggae artist, apparently Mutta Massive, and I never found a tape or I used to have tapes, children. But apparently she was an amazing dancehall DJ. Never found that. Somebody could help me. The mother of all mothers, the Mutta Massive, the Great One, says it gave birth to water first. Water helped birth all other things. Think women knowing women things here. And the one hides in water as it runs through all things. In the Yijing cosmology, water is two female lines with an inner male line, and two broken open lines with openness and then solid, so you have non-being being in the middle, and non-being, which is like woman pregnant with male in the middle, at which Taoists make play with, as we will talk about. And fire is two male lines with an inner female. So male is outer male, inner emotion female. There is irony here we definitely have with Daoism, pointing out the male and the female and the female and the male, and being wise that the opposites are within opposites. Here I definitely think men are definitely the tougher ones, who then actually, of course, when try to share their feelings, end up, in many a female perspective, to be rather naive and open about it in ways that women may be more guarded, oddly, Things like that. Observing that with men and women, I believe, is what people are observing, whether or not we want to follow expectations or stereotypes or categories or what have you. Both, thus, fire and water, male and female, are gender fluids. Yes, have to make the pun. But water is the earthly female element, and fire is the heavenly male element, again with the cosmologies. The Bamboo Lao Tzu says we should rule like a mother. Rule like a mother is another band name there for you. For others, or possibly the album title, which is what endures and gives us solid seeing. Seeing that is solid and fixed. And notice, if you have wise female watery thinking resulting in solid, that would be the male being produced from the female. That would be more, there are plays in the text where the solid comes from the empty, the manifest comes from the hidden, and these are plays within plays. And again, there are many insights, I'm sure, that I do not have into this that are, that we could endlessly have. Yes, all the noises outside, the bounty of nature, the All Mom. The one starts empty and finishes full, female to male, like pregnancy in which a woman bears a son. Matriarchy, secretly and silently supporting patriarchy. In one of the famed verses Wang Bi put up front, the highest is compared to water, and the lowest of the low. The highest good is like lowly water. Water feeds everything without trying, and settles everywhere everyone hates. In this way, it is almost the way of things. Almost. Because in the same way fire or lightning are not energy itself, your great Aunt Judith is energy, water is almost like the way itself. But notice, if water was the way itself, then the way would be watery, cold, wet, and it wouldn't be fiery, so actually the non-beingness of nature and the mother itself. I am thinking, if you want the horror version of it, Lars von Trier's Antichrist, which don't watch that if you have anything like a weak stomach or tolerance for anything, is that the All Mom is not watery or good, it is all. So it's actually, as the Tao itself says, painfully I would call it great, or painfully I would say it's a good thing or a mother, because I'm straining and doing violence to it to say it's motherly. And the same, I would say it's most waterly, but I would not actually call it water, because that would be doing human violence and force to the situation with the concepts and the words. There's a consistent theme of love, strength, and wisdom, of starting with non-being, the female, the emotional, the lowly, and the weak, like a weak child, and then as a second step, complementing it and balancing it with being the male, the rational, the high, and the strong, which is superior, the wider way, compared to starting with being the male and having problems seeing things from both sides. So what they seem to be encouraging, Lewis Carroll, who I do work with Alice in Wonderland, wants people to, and I do believe a lot of the message of Alice in Wonderland is learn patience from the caterpillar and then preserve patiently childlike openness and happiness through then the adult and the strength. I do, and I'm going to do more videos about Alice in Wonderland and all of that. I think it has to do with Aristotle, etc. that what's going on here, it seems, whether or not this is a female text or a text by and for men, FUBU a bit, is that this is men being told, preserve the female and the innocence of childhood and the emotions. Preserve that through developing strength and solidity, whether or not you're female or male. Complement yourself, both opposite sides. Grow your childlike openness into preserve the female childlike open feeling and mind, add to it the complementary one-sided male strength, and this is the alchemy that will turn you into a strong, wise, wider-minded, patient, simple, unbeatable person. There's a lot in Socrates, there's a lot in Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland that seems to have similar matchings of this. I like Poe telling people to be both a poet and a mathematician. I like Lewis Carroll showing the opposite complementary sides of red and white, of childhood and adulthood. Poe and Carroll may have read Taoist poetry in the French, because both are into it. I would love to pursue that further. I have not to my own liking. At the moment, and of course all this can just be basically intuitively male, female, human brain, mind, life, with Poe and Carroll not needing to get this from China or the Taoists through the French. But both Poe and Carroll like the French, and both Poe and Carroll say something that the Taoists are saying here. Start with the innocence and the feeling and the emotions, add to it the words and the strength and the complementary masculine, and keep both together like the yin-yang, and you will become a fusion of opposites that is superior. So it does not actually say be female, in essence, though in a sense, if you've been following along, being both is more feminine and being one versus the other is more masculine. Matters of sexuality, matters of socialization, let's not get all into it. Again, I want to do examples of King of the Hill, but I will not. Again, I feel bewildered, betrayed, from Birdcage. That you find that these things being complementary, and so in order to be truly brilliant as anyone, that you should try to make the masculine and the feminine, the giving and the taking, the weakness and the strength complementary in you, and grow the two together. This then gets very specific. There's many fine examples of this throughout Taoism. So we will finish out this talk here by going through some of the examples of this, of complementing the female with the male, of balancing love and strength together to attain wisdom. So the text says that this is like the cosmos. It starts and continues as a fluid nothing that supports and nourishes all solid somethings and beings out of being, more fluid than the beings, which are also fluid, but from their perspective, standing. And this is the model the wise follow, who remain open even if they have to judge with closure. The text says we know harmony as stability and stability as brilliant, which is verse 55 of the Tao. Love leads to strength, which leads to wisdom, perspective, and insight in a way that strength first doesn't lead to love, and thus doesn't lead to wisdom and perspective. Think about it, if you start open-minded and then gain closed-mindedness while maintaining open-mindedness, whatever that may be, wisdom, etc., then you gain perspective and growth. But if you start closed-minded, and you will not be able to complement it with open-mindedness, such that you won't have both closure and openness, you'll just have closure, and that is not complementary in life. Hegel said the feeling of being in contradiction with oneself is the feeling of being alive. If we start dogmatically and one-sidedly, we have trouble with perspective. But if we start skeptically and two-sidedly, and like the relativists, we have perspective before we begin taking things one-sidedly, which leads to greater wisdom and ability in taking sides. As Zhuangzi says, the wise also have a this and a that, but their that has a this, and their this has a that, with right and wrong as a continuous circular spectrum, like the yin-yang with the seeds of light and dark inside of light and dark themselves. We are in a precarious time in American history. It's hard to say what will happen. I am always reminded I had a hard Marxist friend back in the day who said he wished George W. would have been elected a third time because he's a hard Marxist, and you can figure out how all that works according to your own politics. I will not offer anything more on this day in time. But yes, things come with things come in seasons. To everything turning back to the text here. To become enlightened and immortal according to some, Lietza first forgot, the third Taoist guy, Lietza, Master Lie, forgot right and wrong, then thought of right and wrong, and finally thought without distinction between judging and not judging, forgetting and thinking of right and wrong together. So first he forgets, then he remembers, and then he combines them together. The forgetting, the female, the remembering, the male, and then the absence, the substance, etc. And he was knowing what it was, sort of, in a sense, and then he tried as a male being female, then complements it with male, and you have that order. Sima Chengsen, who lived around 647 to 735 CE during the Tang dynasty, the time when Chan and Daoism is flourishing, wrote the Taoist treatise on sitting and forgetting. Zhuowang Lun says, open hope is the root of the way. Open hope. Openness. And serious devotion is the stem. He says it in that order. Open hope, serious devotion. The root and the stem. Think about the root system open and the stem being closure physically on the thing. Starting with being open and then developing discipline. This is very much like you can look up Hindu philosophy and the lecture I have on that. It talks about balancing openness and closure, and the Indians are doing similar things, and all that is going to be merged together with Buddhism and Taoism as Zen together in China during the Tang, during Sima's time here. The Bamboo Lao Tzu says the open and moving are put in balance with the closed and set, which leads to greater awareness. That those who love life more than ruling the world can be trusted to rule the world, and hold the large picture and the world will follow. The wider view, the large picture. Verse 35 of the Tao. The mother's larger perspective of perspective shows us we should, quote, look at a family to see like a family, look at a village to see like a village, and look at the world to see like the world, which is how to see like the world, which looks at things as individuals, families, villages, states, and all sorts of things together as how it works. Like a mother who lives for herself and others equally, if we live for others, we thrive and live, and if we live for ourselves, we wither and die. The text asks its many male literate readers, can playing the female part open and close the cosmic gate? It is sometimes translated, and it can be putting this or those words in this or that sentence. Can you play the female part? Is oftentimes the English translation. You could also say, can playing the female part open and close the gate? Let's let the cosmic gate and the feminine here, where everything comes from, again, remain vaguely in mind. As if taking the other's perspective is the source of all creativity and life. Think about art, poets, mathematicians, and creativity, and the feminine and the male and the female. Several verses added later say the soft and weak are stronger and last longer than the hard and strong. This is overtly sexual, a lot of it, which maps onto female and male, open and closed, fluid and solid. The Tao says the softest thing on earth overtakes the hardest thing. From this one recognizes the value of we recognize the value of non-action, Wu Wei, in the text. In the final 15 verses, which emphasize the bright and unidentified male, also emphasize the weak, though they speak of neither female nor male. When we enter life, we are soft and weak. When we die, we are hard and strong. Plants, when they enter life, are soft and tender. When they die, they are dry and stiff. Therefore, the hard and strong are companions of death, the male, the violence, and the soft and weak are companions of life, the female, the sex, according to the sort of Thanatos, Eros kind of Freudianisms and our basic impulses. Therefore, when weapons are strong, they are not victorious. When trees are strong, they are cut down. That seems like the male without the complementary female. In the Chuang-Tzu, twice there appears the example of the gnarled old tree which outlives other trees because it is crooked and not straight and strong, and so is not cut down and used, like, say, the most outstanding male with spears would then be put on the front lines or put in a position of war, and then often be your best and your brightest are worn down through war. When Chuang-Tzu, during the Warring States period, when Chuang-Tzu lived, when Chuang-Tzu is asked by Dong Quo where the way of heaven is, during the Warring States period, where the heck is it already? Chuang-Tzu says it is everywhere, like water running through nature. Dong Quo asks him to be more specific, so Chuang-Tzu says it's in the ants, in grass, in tile shards, in poop, and in piss, progressively going lower and lower, horrifying Dong Quo. with each step, and the Zhuangzi continuously suggests that if we see the lowest things as beautiful and avoid striving for and hoarding things people desire, we are happy and free. Weak and strong, earth and heaven, hidden and manifest, like the cosmos and women, work in cycles. Much like the moon, full once a month, a bright white dot on a black background, much as yin in the symbol and cycles of women. According to straight-edged, one-sided human reasoning and thinking, A leads to B, which isn't A. And then it stays there. But if we think two-sidedly and we think in cycles like the yin-yang, A goes to not A, B, and then back to A again. Returning to the beginning, contradictory-wise, like Hegelian dialectical logic, while taking the long way around, contradicting in itself in its motions, like arguing things two-sidedly and looking at things both ways. It says, the quote here, the earth is high and firm, the sky is low and soft. When above is not enough, there is much below. When below is not enough, there is much above. All right, this is a good point to stop the talk, and the next talk, which I will record here and upload in just a little bit, will be on Zhuangzi, my favorite Chinese philosopher. Opposite perspectives. We've already mentioned him a little bit. A sage's this has a that, the wise's this has a that, and their that has a this. Or vice versa. Who knows? Who cares? He doesn't. And we'll talk a bit about his fantastic metaphors and stories of his life a little, and we will get into that text. So we have been going through much of the core philosophy of the Tao Te Ching, the first and foremost work of Chinese philosophy, and said to be the work of Lao Tzu, the first patriarch. Again, a little patriarchal. And we're going to complement that now, moving into the work of the second patriarch, Zhuangzi, and talk about perspective and opposition with another patriarch taking very motherly, like all mom perspectives. All right. Hope you have a great time of it, and I shall see y'all in this or the next life.